So this is straight in with part 2. Well, it's a little bit of a cheeky title. I said, love lies at the root of conflict. So that's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? But perhaps you can already discern from what I said when I said there is love and there is love. You know, it's more to do with how love is not true love very often. And there is conflict arising from that. So this is where we look, initially a little bit at the reality. We've talked about an ideal or something to aim for, or understanding what's there in the kind of original plan and purpose for human beings, centering on love that originates from our Creator. The situation of our world, as you know, is tragically different from that. It's a world of conflict, and if you're like me, you're a little bit drawn to following those latest news stories more often than one is good for one's own health, really. But just know it's our brothers and sisters. It could be me involved in that kind of conflict, or my family, so I need to know what's going on. So reality is, yes, it's tragically different, but even that tragedy is not universal. Many people who are striving and sometimes succeeding to live very happy and successful lives and loving lives. So I'm always amazed at the resilience of human beings to keep going and to create something good despite other difficulties. Our society, largely, it works. I know the headlines are often, this is broken and that is broken, but so much works amazingly well, right? And we should be very thankful. And there's a strong kind of undercurrent in this society in particular about which is moral and ethical, and which is really upholding many important values. Here again is another quotation from the founder himself. This is back in the 1970s. He's talking about us having two purposes in life. We have two purposes in our life. Of course, you may say we have many, many more purposes, but fundamental ones. One is the purpose of our own lives. The other is the purpose of our lives in relation to others, to our family, our nation, or indeed the whole world. There must be balance. If too much stress is placed on individualism, then collective virtues are lost. Love of the nation, brotherhood of the people, family integrity, relationships between parents and children, and finally, even the value of individuals themselves get lost. So there has to be the balance here, he's saying, between the purpose of the individual and the purpose of the whole, as we can call it, or in relation to others. So peace very much requires this living for the sake of others, or living for others. And that itself is based on the pair system, which we looked at, that kind of principle. But I exist to benefit the whole. That's part of my reason for being here, is to benefit things outside of myself. It's like a higher purpose in life. And each of us has that, actually, whether we concentrate on that so much or not. So the individual is part of the whole, as in this diagram, right? And the individual lives for the sake of the whole, then naturally what we see is that the whole supports the individual and somewhere is there to ensure that we're not left out or we're not suffering. Just as if you are living really for a group of, say, 10 friends that you have, and you really, you gave a altruistic, true, genuine love to these people. You were there when they needed. And then when you run into some difficulty, do you think they all disappear? No, they'll immediately come and help you, right? Because that's a natural response. And it's like the whole is living for you in that case. So the cause of conflicts comes when this is upset, this balance is not there, or this harmonious relationship is not there. If we're self-centered, just the fact of being self-centered, concerned about myself as the number one major, thing, it means I have less regard for the higher purpose. I'm not thinking of others. I'm using that mental and emotional energy for my own benefit, supposedly. And I'm thinking then even that others exist for my benefit. And this diminishes or ignores the value of the whole. So it means I see myself a little bit as separate from the whole, as I'm giving myself some undue prominence in terms of importance, and I expect the whole to live for me. So this kind of mentality is counterproductive, actually, and it's against this fundamental principle which operates in the universe. And it's seen in such ideologies as communism or Marxist-Leninism. These are developed along these lines. As Father Moon says, he was a great, contributor of the kind of downfall of communism, actually, whether you know that or not. He developed, based on these unification principles, a critique and counter-proposal to Marxist-Leninism that was taught all around the world. He made for himself the kind of role of number one enemy of communists. That's why a lot of rumors and a lot of unpleasant things were directed towards him. But he sought to expose its fallacies, right? So it was largely an exercise in terms of thought and ideals, as we've been talking about. He said here, back in the 70s, according to the logic of communism, there will be constant struggles as long as there are classes of people. We have this today through our kind of division into groups. This is cultural Marxism at work, whether you're aware of it or not. It's under another name, or it's, and given a very compassionate face, but it's giving kind of rise to set one group against another, victim and oppressor in all levels of society. In our ideology, that means UPF ideology, there are no class differences, but only family relationships. You've already caught that, I'm sure, right? Here there is no discrimination. There are no people above or below, but only the relationship between parents and children, providing order in the family. According to communist ideology, mine is mine and yours is mine. On our part, we must think, mine is yours and yours is the nation's, and the nation's is the world's, and the world's is God's, and God's is mine. So it's a much bigger, all-embracing circle. Are you with me?
Yes.
It's a different mindset, actually. The spirit of unificationism must be greater than the power of communism. In practice, in hope, and in ideals, in these three areas. So that shows that, the work that he was doing in his life was deadly serious work, right? And it, put his life at risk many times, but he was ready to do that. And I think the fullness of this truth and his life experience and teaching hasn't really been revealed to the world yet, or hasn't been accepted by the world yet, right? It's quite extraordinary. And, history will verify all of this, I'm sure. So what is the reality of human nature now? We talked about the ideal or something very beautiful when we were in the first presentation, but the reality is that our selfish nature as human beings is quite well developed. Even people tend to say, if somebody acts very selfishly or greedily, have you heard someone say, oh, that's just human nature? No. The principle, unification principle, is saying no, that's not original human nature. That may be the nature that they're exhibiting, but this isn't how it should be. It isn't the potential that human beings have. So, that difference is important. Selfish nature is, relatively well developed in many people. But the original nature, this is largely undeveloped to different degrees in different people. They will have a very strong original nature and a small selfish nature, but others might be the reverse. So there's this idea, and it goes throughout religion, that there's a conflicted self, and I'm sure through other philosophies as well. It's, there's some kind of point of contention within the individual, and anything that's created for a good and harmonious purpose won't have that kind of inherent contradiction. It doesn't make sense. But if you look at some of these traditions, as in Sikhism, it says, whoever proclaims himself good, no, goodness approaches him not. And that's the kind of arrogance of somebody who's saying, oh, I'm good, the other person is wrong. But, just wait a minute, let's back up there a bit, right? It might be slightly different when it comes to understanding. Or in Hinduism, in the Maitreya Upanishad, it says the mind is twofold, the pure and also the impure. Or, nice to see Native American religions quoted here. This is coming from our World Scripture. World Scripture is a project of UPF to compile quotations from the world's religious traditions on various topics, and it's a kind of comparative text. It's very fascinating, and I commend it to you. But there has a quotation from the Mohawk tradition, says, every person has both a bad heart and a good heart. Yeah, I mean, how true is that, right? Yeah. And you have in Christianity, St. Paul, a very saintly person, obviously, I'm sure a very righteous and godly person, no doubt. But he lamented, especially in the 7th chapter of Romans, he's saying, I do not do the good that I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do, Like, what's going on, Even what I want to do, I find it difficult. And, I find myself doing things, perhaps in relationship to other people hurting somebody, and I didn't want to do that, but I did it. I'm putting myself first before somebody else. Or something was troubling him. My guess is it wasn't so bad, right? But the more saintly you are, the more acute you feel these things, right? If you live a real life of prayer as a monk or a nun, you start to take off these kind of layers of your heart, right? And you think you're okay. That's a danger signal again in the life of religion, isn't it? I think I'm fine. But then little more prayer, a little more work, comparing oneself to one's kind of religious founder or teacher, and you realize, no, I've still got a way to go. There's something there that's blocking me. There's something there which comes out when I don't want it to, and then it bugs me for a few days because I was angry at that person and I shouldn't have been, And, the more the higher the spiritual level of a person, the more these little things really bug them, and they don't know how to get rid of this. And I think St. Paul was something like that. So I looked for a photo of a person with the most conflicted face I could find, right? I don't know who this person is, right? But he looks a little conflicted to me. So some of his thoughts are drawn in an evil direction, selfish thoughts, words, actions. That's where the kind of body is immediately dominating. It's saying, do this for your comfort, for your pleasure, for your kind of, just quality of life, and disregard somebody else. But the same person has kind of thoughts which tend toward goodness, unselfish thoughts, words, and actions. So this is where the original mind, or we can also use a term like conscience, it's there, it's leading him in a different direction. So there's a tug of war going on, right? Yeah. Has anybody here ever experienced that, or is it only me? It's not only me then. That I'm relieved. Thank you very much. So that's why we call it the human condition. In religious thought is often referred to that way, the human condition. This is where we're at, and we shouldn't be. No. I mean, the fact that we can recognize it means already, it's not original. We know that it shouldn't be like that, but we don't know quite the way out of that. Right? Well, this is why, again, some recourse to religious discipline is very good. There's a battle going on in the mind of each person, and it manifests as conflicts in the kind of wider circle, in the family initially, That's where it comes from. In society and even in the world, it takes shape as kind of group fighting group. So origin of conflict, there are clues to the origin of this kind of conflicted self in many of the traditional stories around the world. They are often myths containing, as myths do, some very profound insights, right? In a kind of story form or a kind of allegory form. And there's intuition there about the human condition, and they're surprisingly universal, these stories. Let me put up a few interreligious quotations, or religious quotations, right? Again, for this point. This is the Uttaranga Sutram. This is from Jainism. It's better to die than to indulge in partaking of forbidden lustful pleasure. That's pretty strong, isn't it? I think that qualifies as strong. Right? And these all are to point to our kind of topic of contention, if you like, which is the impact of sexual immorality on human relationships. Here in the Dhammapada of Buddhism, the man who goes to the wife of another digs up the very roots of life. The very roots of life are dug up through that kind of action. Or in the Holy Quran, do not come near adultery, for it is a shameful deed and evil, opening the road to other evils. So it's some kind of root again. Interesting, isn't it? A lot of similarities here. In St. Paul, again, we mentioned him, flee from sexual immorality. Don't have anything to do with it. Why? He who sins sexually sins against his own body. This is like the temple of God that you are given, and if you defile that, it's no good as a temple. God's Spirit is not going to be there. No matter how much you want it or feel that, why doesn't God come to me? Why don't I feel God? Well, if your holy place is not a holy place, how can the Holy One live there or be present there? So, this is his advice. In Judaism, you have insight into that kind of Genesis story. What was the wicked serpent contemplating at that time? He thought, I shall go and kill Adam and wed his wife. This is talking about the fallen archangel, Lucifer, the serpent, and Adam and Eve, the first ancestors. I shall go and kill Adam and wed his wife, and I shall be king over the whole world. In other words, I'll take that kind of position away from human beings, and I'll be the kind of God of this world, as one of the phrases that Jesus used about the devil. Right? You are God of this world. Here in Hinduism, in the Mahabharata, it says, formerly, all creatures were virtuous, and by themselves they obtained divinity. So it's talking about some kind of former age or original age. Then women who had been virtuous became wicked witches. Sorry, women, I'm just quoting here. I'm not. And Brahma filled them with wanton desires, which they in turn inspired in men. He created anger, and henceforth all creatures were born in the power of desire and anger. So, again, you can feel how it's trying to get to an explanation, isn't it? I remember the first time my first daughter, eldest daughter, she said, hearing something on the news, and she said, why do those wicked people do that? I felt pained, because you have to then admit to your pure, innocent, child, yes, the world is not what we'd like it to be, right? People do bad things, and it's very, very tragic, So I always feel these stories a little bit like answers to children. The children are asking these questions, Why do those people, hate us so much? Well, we have to kind of give some explanation. So it's painting a picture around it. And here in the Holy Quran, it says, O children of Adam, let not Satan seduce you in the same manner as he got your parents out of the garden, stripping them of their clothing in order to expose their private parts. Curious. And in Sikhism, sexual desire is the window, pain and pleasure are the gatekeepers, virtue and sin are the gates. So it's a kind of, which is it going to be, right? Which is your entry portal there, right? Curious, isn't it, right? But there's a common theme emerging. And if we go back for a very, it's an example that Father Moon in his research and teaching used very often. So I'm going to look at the Jewish Judeo-Christian story, which is there in the beginning of the first book of the Old Testament, of the Jewish Torah. It's the Genesis story of the human fall, where it talks about our first ancestors in the center of the garden. It's a beautiful, idyllic place. They are told they can eat of any of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil they shall not eat. For in the day that they eat of it, they will die. It's a very strong prohibition to eating this fruit. And there have been debates down through history. What is this fruit? Right? Well, I'm not going to go through all the theological arguments. You'll be happy to know, right? But the conclusion, Father Moon's conclusion, his insight, in a way it's like something which the religious world knew, but also didn't fully know or fully put its weight behind. Shall I say that? That is, he said, because the commandment is like, if you eat of this, you will die. It's an allegory. It's talking about the misuse of love itself. So the fruit that's referred to, it's not a test of obedience. It's more desirable than life itself because it's there to kind of reach the ideal, and it's portrayed as being very essential to life's, fulfilling life's goals. So his profound insight was that this fruit is love itself, especially the holy husband-wife relationship. So if you misuse that, then other things, other consequences, very bad consequences come from that, right? So in a way, like I say, the religious world has known this, but still there are many who just think of this maybe as a literal fruit or as a test or something like that. But the consequences are so serious and bring about this conflicted situation in individuals, right? Of course, it's more than just a sexual relationship. It's love itself becoming impure and self-centered and therefore self-serving, and it's making this kind of contradiction between within the individual that then gets applied to relationships around oneself. So to say it's love itself, yes, actually, when you look back at Holy Scripture, well, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it's an unusual title for a tree, isn't it? But elsewhere in biblical language, to know means to have sexual relationships, right? It occurs always in the little primary school nativity plays that children do in the Christian tradition, right? This line is said by little kind of 4 or 5 years old children, Joseph was betrothed to Mary, but he did not know her, right? So they all say that, right? What are they talking about? They don't know what they're talking about, really. They're too young, right? And he's, of course he knew her, but they didn't have any sexual relationship, right? They were betrothed and they had no sexual relationship, right? So that's what it's a euphemism. It's a kind of, not in front of the children kind of thing, right? To know. And to bear fruit, yes, this is to produce a result that's passed on through the lineage. It's the most precious fruit of this precious aspect of love, is to have children, is to continue the lineage, right? Are you with me? So, I'm not saying this to convince you of anything. It's just that I want you to grasp why in his understanding, Father Moon zeroes in on this aspect of love, true love and false love, and how to unravel that knot and establish traditions of true love at every level of society and human relationships. So this means that for our first human ancestors in this story, they're growing to their perfection. They're like in the process of making that first foundation of peace that we talked about, or first blessing, but they're not there yet. They're not mature yet And yet they get persuaded to enter into a premature sexual relationship between the two of them, and Archangel Lucifer has such a relationship with Eve. So there's a two-stage process to this contamination of love in human beings. And that gets passed on, because that can be passed on, right? If you don't have an example of true love in your parents, how are you ever going to learn, right? And, so they're given a commandment, do not eat of that fruit, during that time of their growing period, because we need to mature to a certain level to be able to handle love. Love needs a certain level of maturity and personal control and self-discipline, and we need to understand its purpose and its function. This intimate sexual relationship between husband and wife should be within the marriage context, and then it makes so much sense. And then, in a way, they would be free to eat. So what comes first is a growth to spiritual maturity, right? And then on that basis, you can enter into your second foundation of peace or marriage blessing, and then have a good example to share with children. As it is, many people bring their immature love, their self-centered love, into a married relationship. So the marriage may be rosy to begin with, but after a time, that self-centeredness becomes apparent, right? And, especially if the husband or the wife strays and has a relationship outside of that marriage, which they don't want their partner to know about, already that foundation of trust and love is undermined and problems ensue, right? We know it. But this is where it comes from. It's very, very fundamental, Father Moon was saying, in human history. It goes right back to the beginning. So we haven't learnt to perfect our love and pass on love in its true and altruistic form. Are you with me, everybody? So, wow, I'm condensing a lot here, but at the same time, I don't want to skimp on certain things because it sounds a bit superficial if I do. But if it leaves you with questions, I quite understand, and we can go into those in more detail. So here again, to go back to the founder's own words, he said, what is the reality of our world today? The disorder and sickness of every kind, including war, violence, and drug abuse that have infected humankind. More important, the rapid collapse of sexual morality among the young, the increasing divorce rate, the breakdown of the family are all destroying the foundation of human society. All these things originate from the fall. That's where it's coming from this kind of start of human history. So do you remember my definition of true, genuine love? Do you remember what that was?
Yes. It was the happiness of the other people.
Exactly. Say it again. Selfless. Yes. In fact, here to see it again, it's unconditionally caring about the happiness of another person. Right? So what is false love? Love and love. True love, genuine love, but there's also false love, which is largely what is experienced by the majority of people, right? False love is, I care how you make me feel. Already you can see how there's something inherently self-concerned or self-centered about that, isn't it, right? I care how you make me feel. As long as you make me feel good, I love you. As soon as I don't get that, I don't love you anymore, right? I'll love somebody else. And so people get into serial relationships like this because they love the kind of fact of falling in love. It feels wonderful. But when that kind of tires a little bit and, because they have the wrong expectation or wrong understanding or wrong practice of love, then they look somewhere else. They want to recreate that. So we don't question this enough in our society. We feel it's kind of the alternative is something very prudish or very, restrictive. But no, the point, and this is what we are doing when we're teaching our young people within the unification movement, is saying, no, it's because of the importance and preciousness of love itself. We need to learn how to love in a true way, right? Because in the end, all the happiness will be yours. And you'll avoid a lot of the heartaches and a lot of the difficulties and a lot of the pain that people associate with love, right? So, I mean, you all listen to, well, maybe you don't all listen to pop music or, popular music. Anybody do that here? I mean, you know what the lyrics are about, right? It's all about this kind of pain of love or being cheated in love or somebody, I loved you and you let me down and was that somebody else I saw you with last night? And, it's just kind of, because it resonates with people's hearts that they like to hear this. And when they're feeling down and let down, then they put on that record and they listen and they cry along with it, right? Because it's all about, I care how you make me feel. No, this is twisted, actually. This is twisted around. Of course, I'm talking about Father Moon's thought, but I have a quotation from you from a different source, because I think it helps to illustrate and show that we're not talking in a vacuum here. This is a very great spiritual teacher, Eckhart Tolle. I don't know if you come across him. I recommend it. In his book, A New Earth, Create a Better Life, he says there, what is commonly called falling in love is in most cases, sometimes it's very pure and beautiful. Absolutely, right? And if that happened to you, I'm so happy, right? But in most cases, it's an intensification of self-centered wanting and needing. You become addicted to another person, or rather your image of that person. It has nothing to do with true love, which contains no wanting whatsoever. I'm not seeking this for a need in myself, right? I'm seeking to give happiness. I'm caring about the happiness of the other, and in the process, I find my own happiness. Right? So this is why love has to be enacted this way. So much of religious tradition in particular, and other insights like this, person Eckhart Tolle is pointing out, that we have to separate out this ego and get rid of this ego, and we have to love in a pure and altruistic way, right? And that's the challenge, right? But there lies the real benefits. So we talked about 3 foundations of peace before, right? Individual peace, be fruitful. Peace in the family, and then through that in society as a kind of unit or building block of a kingdom of heaven or ideal world. And that's multiply in that 3 blessings. And then universal peace is to have the right kind of dominion, responsible stewardship and ownership of the natural world, including pursuing scientific development for the benefit of everybody, mastering your own kind of area of contribution to society through your career and through your creative skills and these kind of things. Everything's contained in that 3rd foundation of peace. So I often say to especially younger audiences, what do you want for your happiness that is not there? And I haven't heard anybody come up with an answer yet, right? What do you want for your happiness that isn't somewhere in there? That's why I don't think of it myself as religious doctrine. It's much more fundamental. It's life, right? It's life itself. This is the blessing of life. And yet many people, even maybe right now, somebody's committing suicide. They're ending their life because they don't know any meaning in life. They don't have any purpose in life. They don't, they feel it's better to die than just carry on living in this world. It's very tragic, right? So we need to understand this because it's a key for our happiness. However, these became corrupted, and I talked about the kind of misuse or misapplication of love there. First of all, mind-body conflict. There's some evil influence there which sets mind and body against each other, or body as subject over the mind as object, which is not how it should be. So dominated by my physical desires, by the me or ego aspect of myself. So much of religion is actually to make the body obey the mind. It's a kind of pathway to do that, if taken seriously. it's not really, in my mind, about believing certain things. Just believing certain things won't bring you enlightenment or salvation. That's just an idea. But you have to practice this in your life. And the second foundation got corrupted through conflicts in society and wars, this manifestation of the conflict in the individual and the self-centered desires of individuals, often working together. And then you have a kind of corruption of that third foundation of peace through environmental damage or using the product of our scientific development for means which are, to the detriment of human society, or for the kind of collapse of our culture, or for the undermining of what is good. So, yes, we have to rethink that. So, interestingly, and this is Father Moon's kind of the final insight, which I'll share, when he looks at this story, yes, it's looking at a story and others, because he researched very deeply other religious traditions as well. And, for example, I found out that when he was wrongly imprisoned in America for trumped-up tax charges, it was a total, unfabricated accusations, yes. But he served out his prison sentence. Apparently, while in prison there, he read the Holy Quran twice. Completely, right? Interesting. Just a little aside there, but his understanding that came through this, he had to fight for these insights and revelation and check them always, before God in prayer. Is this right? Is this right? Have I understood? Really, and sometimes being denied until he could absolutely be sure and stake his life on it. That, we've inherited from the very beginning certain aspects, what we call fallen nature. It has 4 aspects to it. The first that comes out of this story is not loving others as God loves them, or not taking God's standpoint in loving others, or seeing situations as God sees them. That was the first. Wow. The second, he found, was neglecting our own responsibility and seeking a position and role that rightfully belongs to others. So, contained in this is things like jealousy, comparing ourselves to somebody else, wishing, we had a position that somebody else didn't. And as soon as your mind is occupied with that, you're not thinking about what you should be thinking. So you're neglecting your own responsibility. Are you with me? Yeah. And then the third, seeking to dominate others whom we should respect and cooperate with. This is the kind of thinking that my opinion is more important than anybody else's, and I have it right, and you have to listen to me. Behaving unrighteously and therefore disrupting the proper order. The last one is seeking to justify one's own wrongdoings and to shift the blame to encourage others to join in the same evil behavior. Now we have whole ideologies in the 20th century which justify this and incorporate this as a kind of, give justification to it. But this is, I know I say to people, a little jokingly, this is not poetry, right? So, yeah, but it's so insightful that, a lot of what is taught in religious traditions about sin or evil, it's expressed in concepts, isn't it? Like lust or greed or anger or sloth, these kind of traditional things. If you're Taoist, it might be obsequiousness or something like that. There's a whole list of concepts. And it's largely taught through stories because those as dictionary definitions don't mean anything, really. But this gets under the skin of that. This is what gives rise to lust, what gives rise to unrighteous anger, what gives rise to greed, and this is it. It's these kind of little initial twistings which we can actually easily succumb to if we're not aware. And now, having given you this, you might see it everywhere, right? But in a true, genuine religious tradition, you should not just point the finger. The purpose of this is, first of all, to see it in whom?
Myself.
In myself, exactly, right? So I have to see it in myself, first of all. But also, coincidentally, you will see, in the kind of stories which go, the leaking of things which are not true in the press by somebody to pull somebody down or to try and get their job or get them, all this kind of stuff that goes on in our society, it's all traces back to this. It's understanding these aspects of fallen nature and how to overcome them. Okay, I think I've said enough for the second one. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and I'm going to close there.